Hi, I'm Linda, and this is No Frills ASMR. I took this book out and it had the cover on it, and I walked away for like 2 minutes, and the cover is gone. I can't find it anywhere. I mean, I looked all over, and it was already ripped off, but it was sitting on it. It's gone. It's so weird. But anyway, we have been reading The Adventures of Ulysses, and some kid at some point, because I bought this used, wrote Homer instead of Bernard Evslin on here, which I thought was funny. But this is a version from, what was it, the 50s? 1969. Kind of a, not a retelling, written for teens of that era, I guess. Even though I've read the original and it's easy to read, as I recall. So, or maybe I didn't read it. I thought it was the original, but anyway. All right. So I think this is where we are on page 79 of this book. I am sorry to anyone who's been listening along. I kind of, I don't want to say I forgot. Maybe a little bit. And then today I was listening to people talking about this new movie that's coming out with Matt Damon, and it's the Odyssey, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go read some more. Anyway, The Wandering Rocks is what chapter we're on. They sailed out of darkness into light, and their hearts danced with joy to see the blue water and the blue sky again. A fair west wind plumped their sails and sped them toward home. If this wind keeps blowing, said Ulysses to himself, perhaps we can skirt the dangerous islands they spoke of, sail right around those sirens and these tide-drinking, man-eating monsters, and find our way home without further mishap. True, it was foretold differently, but what of that? How reliable are such prophecies after all? Ajax and Achilles were always better at fighting than thinking. Why should they be wiser dead than alive? And Elpenor, my most inept hand, must I take his word for what is going to happen? Why? That fall from the mast must have scattered the few wits he had. Besides, they were all ghosts down there advising me, and ghosts are gloomy by nature, as everyone knows. They like to frighten people. It's the way they've been trained. No, by the gods, I will not accept all this evil as inevitable, but will stretch my sails to the following wind and speed for Ithaca. At that very moment, he heard a strange sound, not a sound the wind makes or the water, nor the voice of man or gull. He looked about, searched sky and water. He saw nothing. Then he turned over the helm to one of the sailors and climbed the mast. There he could see for miles over the dancing water, and far to the south he saw tiny black things floating, so small he could not tell whether he was imagining them or not. But they grew larger even as he watched, and as they came near, the strange moaning, grinding sound grew louder and louder. What are they? He said to himself. They look like rocks, but rocks don't float. Can they be dolphins? Not whales, surely. Whale spouts? And all fish are voiceless. What is it then that comes and cries upon the silence of the seas? Another evil spawned by the stubborn god who pursues me? But what? By now the objects were close enough to see, and he saw that they were indeed rocks, a floating reef of rocks, jagged boulders bobbing on the waves like corks, rubbing against each other and making that moaning, grinding sound, and coming fast, driving purposefully towards the ship. Port the helm, roared Ulysses. The ship swung northward as the rocks pressed from the south. Floating rocks, said Ulysses, Who has seen their like? This is a wonder unreported by any traveler. We see a new thing today, and I should like to see the last of it. Are they following us? Are they driven by some intelligence? Or are we caught in a trick of tide that moves them so? I shall soon see. He took the helm himself then and sailed the ship in a circle to give the rocks a chance to pass by. But to his horror, he saw the rocks begin to circle also, keeping always between him and the open sea to the south. They held the same distance now. He sheered off northward. They followed, keeping the same distance. But when he turned and headed south, they held their place. He saw them loom before his bow, jagged and towering, ready to crush his hull like a walnut, and he had to swing off again and dart away northward as the crew raised a shout in terror. So he set his course north by northwest, thinking sadly, I see that I can avoid nothing that is foretold. I cannot bear southward around the Isle of the Sun, where lurk the demons and the monsters. I have been warned against, but must speed toward them as swiftly as toward a rendezvous with a loved one. These rocks shepherd me. They herd this vessel as a stray sheep is herded by the shepherd's dog, driving me toward that which the vengeful gods have ordained. So be it then. If I cannot flee, then I must dare. Heroes are made, I see, when retreat is cut off. So be it. He set his course for the Isle of the Sun Titan, which men called Thrinakia, and which we now know as Sicily. All through the night they sailed. In the darkness, they lost sight of the rocks, but they could hear them clashing and moaning, keeping pace with the ship. Oh, that was a shorter chapter, you guys. Let's see how long this one is. All right, I'll read this one too, but hold on, I gotta get a little. For some reason, my lips are super dry. Let me just. This is not really for lips, but nothing. You ever get that? It's like uncomfortable. All right, the sirens. There's a picture. In the first light of morning, Ulysses awoke and called his crew about him. Men, he said, listen well, for your lives today hang upon what I'm about to tell you. That large island to the west is Thrinacia, where we must make a landfall, for our provisions run low. But to get to the island, we must pass through a narrow strait. And at the head of this strait is a rocky islet, where dwell two sisters called sirens, whose voices you must not hear. Now I shall guard you against their singing, which will lure you to shipwreck. But first, you must bind me to the mast. Tie me tightly, as though I were a dangerous captive, and no matter how I struggle, no matter what signals I make to you, do not release me, lest I follow their voices to destruction, taking you with me. Thereupon, Ulysses took a large lump of beeswax, which was used by the sailmender to slick his heavy thread, and kneaded it in his powerful hands until it became soft. Then he went to each man of the crew and plugged his ears with the soft wax. He cocked their ears so tightly they could hear nothing but the thin pulsing of their own blood. Then he stood himself against the mast, and the men bound him with rawhide, winding it tightly around his body, lashing him to the thick mast. They had lowered the sail because ships cannot sail through a narrow strait unless there is a following wind, and now each man of the crew took his place at the great oars. The polished blades whipped the seas into a froth of white water, and the ship nosed toward the strait. Ulysses had left his own ears unplugged because he had to remain in command of the ship and had need of his hearing. Every sound means something upon the sea, but when they drew near the rocky, I feel like I'm saying this word wrong, islet, and he heard the first faint strains of the sirens singing, then he wished he had stopped his own ears too with wax. All the strength suddenly surged toward the sound of those magical voices. The very hair of his head seemed to be tugging at his scalp, trying to fly away. His eyeballs started out of his head. For in those voices were the sounds that men love. Happy sounds like bird railing, sleet hailing, milk paling. Sad sounds like rain leaking, tree creaking, wind seeking. Autumn sounds like leaf tapping, fire snapping, river lapping. Quiet sounds like snow flaking, spider waking, heart breaking. It seemed to him then that the sun was burning him to a cinder as he stood, and the voices of the sirens purled in a cool crystal pool upon the rock past the blue hot flatness of the sea and its lacings of white hot spume. It seemed to him he could actually see their voices deepening into a silvery cool pool, and must plunge into that pool or die a flaming death. He was filled with such a fury of desire that he swelled his mighty muscles, burst the rawhide bonds like thread, and dashed for the rail. But he had warned two of his strongest men, Perimedes and Eurylochus, to guard him close. They seized him before he could plunge into the water. He swept them aside as if they had been children, but they had held him long enough to give the crew time to swarm about him. He was overpowered, crushed by their numbers, and dragged back to the mast. This time he was bound with the mighty hawser that held the anchor. The men returned to their rowing seats, unable to hear the voices because of the wax corking their ears. The ship swung about and headed for the strait again. Louder now and clearer, the tormenting voices came to Ulysses. Again he was aflame with a fury of desire. But try as he might, he could not break the thick anchor line. He strained against it until he bled, but the line held. The men bent their oars and rowed more swiftly, for they heard the mast creaking like a tall tree in a heavy wind, and they feared that Ulysses, in his fury, might snap it off short and dive, mast and all, into the water to get to the sirens. Now they were passing the rock, and Ulysses could see the singers. There were two of them. They sat on a heap of white bones, the bones of shipwrecked sailors, and sang more beautifully than senses could bear. But their appearance did not match their voices, for they were shaped like birds, huge birds, larger than eagles. They had feathers instead of hair, and their hands and feet were claws, but their faces were the faces of young girls. When Ulysses saw them, he was able to forget the sweetness of their voices because their look was so fearsome. He closed his eyes against the terrible sight of the bird women perched on their heap of bones. But when he closed his eyes and could not see their ugliness, then their voices maddened him once again, and he felt himself straining against the bloody ropes. He forced himself to open his eyes and look upon the monsters, so that the terror of their bodies would blot the beauty of their voices. But the men who could only see, not hear the sirens, were so appalled by their aspect that they swept their oars faster and faster, and the black ship scuttled past the rock. The sirens' voices sounded fainter and fainter and finally died away. When Perimedes and Eurylochus saw the captain's face lose its madness, they unbound him, and he signaled to the men to unstop their ears. For now he heard the whistling gurgle of a whirlpool, and he knew that they were approaching the narrowest part of the strait, and must pass between Scylla and Charybdis. Skyline, Charybdis. Oh, baby. Next time.